Russell Hayes stood frozen in the marble hallway of a mansion he could never afford, his calloused janitor hands trembling as he stared at the portrait on the wall. The girl in the painting was 8 years old, wearing a faded blue yarn bracelet identical to the one hidden beneath his worn sleeve. His knees buckled. When the mansion's owner appeared, a cold, elegant woman in a $1,000 suit, Russell's voice cracked through his tears. "Madam, she grew up with me in the orphanage." Vivian Sterling's face drained of color for exactly 3 seconds before her mask snapped back into place, her voice sharp as winter glass. "You have the wrong person. Leave immediately." But Russell had seen it, the split-second recognition in her eyes, the way her hand flew to her wrist where designer bracelets concealed something underneath. 31 years ago, 2 children made a promise under an oak tree at Riverside Orphanage. One kept it. One buried it beneath a fortune built on lies. Now, in a hallway that cost more than Russell's entire life, the truth neither of them could escape had just walked through the door. What happens when the past she's been running from shows up in the one place she thought was safe? The morning had started like any other Tuesday. Russell woke at 5, made instant coffee in the chipped mug Wyatt had painted at school, and watched his 7-year-old son sleep on the pull-out couch that served as both living room and bedroom in their studio apartment. The medical bills were stacked on the kitchen counter, $23,000 for Wyatt's heart condition, plus another $8,000 from the emergency room visit 3 months ago. Russell had 3 jobs: janitor at an office building, night stock at a grocery store, and whatever day work he could find through the temp agency. It still wasn't enough. The temp agency called at 6:30. A mansion in the hills needed someone for a deep clean before a charity gala. $500 for 2 days' work. Russell took it without asking questions. He dropped Wyatt at his neighbor's apartment, Mrs. Chen, who watched him for $20 a day and never asked why Russell worked so much, and drove his 1998 Honda Civic up the winding roads where houses had gates and driveways longer than his entire street. The Sterling mansion sat at the top like a crown, all white columns and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the morning sun like sheets of gold. Russell parked in the service entrance, grabbed his cleaning supplies from the trunk, and walked through the kitchen door as instructed. The housekeeper who'd hired him had left a note. "Start with the main hallway. Work your way to the ballroom." He tied on his apron, pulled rubber gloves over his calloused hands, and stepped into the entrance hall. That's when he saw it. The portrait hung between 2 marble columns, massive and impossible to miss. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, sat under an oak tree with sunlight filtering through the leaves. She wore a simple dress, her hair in 2 braids, and on her left wrist, Russell's chest tightened. A blue yarn bracelet with a pattern he'd recognize anywhere because he'd watched her make it, strand by strand, 31 years ago. His knees gave out. He dropped the mop. The clatter echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Russell stumbled forward, his vision blurring as tears he'd kept locked away for 3 decades suddenly broke free. He reached out, his fingertips nearly touching the canvas. "Viv," he whispered, the nickname no one had used since 1994. The sound of heels on marble made him spin around. A woman stood at the top of the grand staircase, tall, immaculate, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her navy suit tailored to perfection. She descended slowly, her expression unreadable. When she reached the bottom step, her eyes met his, and Russell saw it. The flash of recognition, the sharp intake of breath, the way her hand instinctively moved to her wrist. "Madam, she grew up with me in the orphanage." The words tore out of Russell like a confession, raw and desperate. Riverside, 1992. "You made this bracelet." He shoved up his sleeve, revealing the faded blue yarn still tied around his wrist, frayed but intact. Vivian Sterling's face went white, Her lips parted. For 3 seconds, Russell saw her. Really saw her. The girl who used to share her bread with him, who cried when the older kids picked on the new arrivals, who promised under that oak tree that she'd never forget him. Then the mask slammed down. Her spine straightened. Her voice, when it came, could have cut glass. "You have the wrong person. I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but I suggest you leave before I call the police." Russell stood there, his heart hammering. "Your name was Vivian Reeves. You were 10 when the Sterlings took you. You told me you'd come back. You promised." Vivian's jaw tightened. "I don't know any Vivian Reeves. My name is Vivian Sterling. I was born in London to the Sterling Montgomery family. If you don't leave immediately, I will have you arrested for trespassing." But her hand was still pressed against her wrist, knuckles white. Russell looked at her wrist, then at the painting, then back at her. "If I'm wrong," he said quietly, "then why are you covering your bracelet?" Vivian's eyes widened, just for a moment. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown. "Get out," she said without looking back. Russell stood in that hallway for another minute, staring at the portrait of the girl he'd known, the girl he'd protected from bullies, the girl who'd made him promise to keep his bracelet forever because it meant they'd always be connected. Then he picked up his mop, left through the kitchen door, and drove back down the hill. He didn't notice the black sedan that followed him, didn't see the camera lens pointing at his license plate. He was too busy trying to breathe through the weight crushing his chest. 3 days later, Russell was scrubbing toilets at the office building when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Hayes?" A woman's voice, clipped and professional. "This is Vivian Sterling. We need to talk. Tonight. 11 o'clock. She rattled off an address, his address. Russell's stomach dropped. "How did you—" The line went dead. He stared at his phone, then at the clock. 6 hours. He finished his shift in a daze, picked up Wyatt from Mrs. Chen's, made boxed macaroni for dinner, and put his son to bed at 9. At 10:50, he sat on the couch and waited. At 11 exactly, someone knocked. Russell opened the door. Vivian stood in the hallway of his rundown apartment building, so out of place she might as well have been on another planet. She wore jeans, expensive ones, and a simple black sweater, her hair down for the first time. Without the armor of her suit and jewelry, she looked smaller, younger, more like the girl he remembered. She glanced past him at the studio apartment, at Wyatt asleep on the pull-out couch, at the medical bills covering the tiny kitchen table, at the single bedroom door that Russell kept closed because it was barely bigger than a closet. Something shifted in her expression. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. Russell stepped aside. Vivian entered, her eyes moving over every detail, the toys in a cardboard box, the drawings taped to the refrigerator, the mug that said, "World's Best Dad," in crooked letters. She stood in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. "I didn't come to your mansion for money," Russell said. "I took a job. I saw the painting. That's all." Vivian nodded slowly. She walked to the kitchen table, picked up one of the medical bills. $23,000 for pediatric cardiology. Her hands shook. "Your son," Russell's voice hardened. Don't you dare make this about, I'm not." Vivian set the bill down carefully. I didn't know." They stood in silence. Finally, Vivian spoke. "I remember you, Russell. I remember everything. The oak tree, the bracelet, how you broke your ribs when those boys pushed me down the stairs and you threw yourself on top of me." She turned to face him, and her eyes were wet. "I remember promising I'd come back. The Sterlings picked me up in a black car. I looked out the back window until I couldn't see the orphanage anymore. I thought they were taking me for a visit. That I'd go back, her voice cracked. They burned all my things that first night. My clothes, my drawings, the photo of us under the oak tree. They said I was Vivian Sterling now, that Vivian Reeves never existed. Russell sank onto the couch, his hands over his face. You were 10 years old. I was 10, Vivian agreed. And they were rich, powerful. When I turned 17, I snuck out and drove to Riverside. The orphanage administrator told me you'd been adopted in 1995. New family, new last name. The records were sealed. She sat down beside him, keeping a careful distance. I hired investigators, spent thousands. They found nothing. You'd vanished. Russell looked at her, really looked. The fine lines around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way she still wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to hold something in. Why didn't you just tell me? He asked. At the mansion. Why lie? Vivian's laugh was bitter. Because my entire life is a lie, Russell. The Sterling Montgomery lineage, fiction. My business partners, my investors, the board of directors, they all believe I'm descended from British aristocracy. If anyone finds out I'm an orphan from Riverside, it's over. Contracts worth millions will dissolve overnight. I'll be investigated, audited, destroyed. She pulled up her sweater sleeve. Underneath 3 diamond bracelets was a thin band of faded blue yarn. I've worn this every single day for 31 years. I've just gotten very good at hiding it. Russell stared at the bracelet, the twin of his own, faded and frayed, but still intact. So what now? He asked. Vivian met his eyes. Now I offer you a deal. I'll pay for your son's surgery. All of it. Every medical bill you have. And I'll hire you. Really hire you. Not as a janitor. A good salary. Benefits. Enough so you don't have to work 3 jobs. She paused. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement. You never tell anyone about Riverside, about us, about who I really am. Russell felt something cold settle in his stomach. You want to buy my silence. I want to protect my life, Vivian said quietly, and help yours. Russell stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot 3 floors down. When I was 11, he said, and you'd been gone a year. Another kid asked me about the bracelet. I told him a friend made it for me. He laughed, said orphans don't have friends, just other orphans. I punched him. He touched the yarn on his wrist. Got put in isolation for 3 days, but I didn't take the bracelet off. He turned to face Vivian. You know what I thought about in that room? I thought about you, about how you promised we'd always be connected. I thought if I kept the bracelet, somehow you'd feel it. You'd know I was still here, still remembering. Vivian's face crumpled. She pressed her hands over her mouth, but the sob came anyway. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Russell shook his head. I don't want your money, Viv. I don't want your guilt. I just want... He stopped. Didn't know how to finish that sentence. Wyatt stirred on the couch, mumbling in his sleep. Vivian wiped her eyes, walked over, and looked down at the little boy. He looks like you, she said softly. Same stubborn chin. Despite everything, Russell smiled. His mom used to say that. She died giving birth to him. Complications. They did everything, but... He swallowed hard. So it's just us. Vivian knelt beside the couch, her hand hovering over Wyatt's hair like she wanted to touch, but didn't dare. I had a daughter, she said. Russell's head snapped up. Vivian's voice was barely audible. 19 years ago. I was 22, engaged to a man my adoptive parents chose. Old money. Perfect pedigree. I got pregnant. He left when I was 4 months along. Said he couldn't marry someone who'd trap him. She closed her eyes. I had a daughter. Beautiful. Perfect. But there were complications during delivery. She lived for 6 hours. The silence in the apartment was deafening. Her name was Rose. I held her the entire time. And when she died, I made a promise that I'd build something, that I'd be so successful, so untouchable, that no one could ever hurt me again, that no one could ever leave. Russell sat down heavily. "Viv, don't," she said. "Don't pity me. I got what I wanted. Empire, money, power. I just had to cut out every piece of myself that remembered being human." She stood, smoothed her sweater, rebuilt her composure brick by brick. "The offer stands. Think about it." She walked to the door. Russell called out, "What if I say no?" Vivian paused, her hand on the doorknob. "Then I'll respect it. And I'll stay away. Because clearly, that's what I'm good at." She left. The door clicked shut. Russell sat in the dark, listening to his son breathe, staring at the bracelet on his wrist that suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The next morning, Russell found an envelope taped to his apartment door. Inside, a cashier's check for $31,000, the exact amount of Wyatt's medical bills, and a note in handwriting he recognized from old drawings they used to make together. "This isn't charity. It's what Rose's trust fund would have paid if she'd lived. Please, let me do this one thing right." Vi. Russell looked at the check, at the bills on his table, at Wyatt eating cereal, oblivious to the weight his father carried. He made a decision. He cashed the check, paid every bill, and then he called the temp agency. "That mansion job, is it still available?" They told him the position had been filled permanently. By him. Salary, benefits, everything. He started Monday. For 3 weeks, Russell worked at the Sterling mansion. He cleaned floors Vivian never walked on, dusted rooms she never entered. They moved around each other like ghosts, never speaking, never meeting eyes. Vivian left instructions on the kitchen counter. Russell completed them and left before she came home. It was a choreographed dance of avoidance, until Wyatt got sick. It was supposed to be a simple cold, but Wyatt's heart condition made everything complicated. The fever spiked to 104. Mrs. Chen called Russell at work, panicked. Russell raced home, found his son barely conscious, drove to the emergency room doing 70 in a 40 zone. The ER doctor admitted Wyatt immediately. Infection. The heart was struggling. They needed to monitor overnight, maybe longer. Russell sat in the pediatric ward at 2 in the morning, his head in his hands. His phone was dead. He hadn't eaten in 18 hours, hadn't called work, didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the little boy sleeping fitfully in the hospital bed, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed. The door opened. Russell looked up. Vivian stood there in sweatpants and an oversized coat, her hair in a messy bun, no makeup, eyes wild. "Mrs. Chen called me," she said breathlessly. "I'm listed as an emergency contact. I put myself down when I paid the bills. I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have, but I needed to know he was okay." She saw Wyatt and her face collapsed. "Oh, God." She crossed the room in 3 steps, sank into the chair beside Russell, stared at the little boy who looked so small in the big hospital bed. "Is he?" "He's stable," Russell said. His voice was raw. "But the infection's making his heart work too hard. If it doesn't improve in the next 48 hours, they'll have to do the surgery now instead of waiting 6 months. He's not ready. The doctor said the risk is—" He couldn't finish. Vivian reached out, hesitated, then took Russell's hand. Her palm was cold. "He's strong, like his dad." Russell's shoulders shook. He tried to hold it together, but he was so tired, so scared. "I can't lose him," he whispered. "I can't. He's all I have." Vivian's fingers tightened around his. "You won't. I promise." They sat like that for hours. At some point, Vivian got coffee from the vending machine, terrible burnt coffee that tasted like motor oil. Russell drank it anyway. At dawn, Wyatt's fever broke. The machines beeped steadier. The doctor came in, checked vitals, said they'd dodged the worst. They'd keep him another day for observation. But he was improving. Russell sagged with relief. Vivian pressed her hands over her mouth, her eyes squeezed shut. When the doctor left, she stood. "I'll go. I just needed to make sure." Russell caught her wrist, not hard, just enough to stop her. "Stay," he said. She looked at him, surprised. "Please." Vivian sat back down. Over the next 12 hours, as Wyatt slept and woke and slept again, Russell and Vivian talked. Really talked. Not about the past, not about obligations. Just life. Vivian told him about her company, the pressure, the constant fear of being exposed. Russell told her about Wyatt's first word, car, not dad, which he pretended didn't hurt. About how he'd learned to braid hair from YouTube videos. About the time he'd tried to bake a birthday cake and set off the smoke alarm. They laughed. Actually laughed. And when Wyatt finally woke up fully, Russell introduced them properly. "Wyatt, this is my friend Vivian. We knew each other when we were kids." Wyatt looked at Vivian with fever-bright eyes. "You're pretty," he said. Then, "Do you like dinosaurs?" Vivian smiled. A real smile, soft and genuine. "I don't know much about dinosaurs." Wyatt's eyes widened like she'd admitted to a crime. "Dad, we have to teach her." Russell chuckled. "When you're feeling better, buddy." But Vivian leaned forward. "Tell me now. What's your favorite?" Wyatt launched into a detailed explanation of why the Ankylosaurus was superior to all other dinosaurs. Vivian listened with complete attention, asking questions, gasping at the right moments. Russell watched them and felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen for so long he'd forgotten it could thaw. When Wyatt fell asleep again mid-sentence, Vivian carefully pulled the blanket up to his chin. Russell saw her hand tremble. "You'd be a good mom," he said quietly. Vivian's face went still. "I had my chance." "That wasn't a chance. That was a tragedy." Vivian looked at him, and her expression was so raw it hurt to see. "After Rose died, I swore I'd never let myself need anyone again, that I'd never be that vulnerable. I built walls so high, I forgot what it felt like to be human." She touched Wyatt's hand, just one finger against his small palm. But watching him, hearing him talk about dinosaurs like they're the most important thing in the world. I remembered. Russell didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They sat in silence until visiting hours ended. Vivian left with a promise to come back the next day. She kept it. And the day after. And the day after that. When Wyatt was finally discharged, Vivian drove them home because Russell's car wouldn't start. She waited while he got Wyatt settled, then helped carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs. She didn't have to. She just did. It became a pattern. Vivian started showing up at the apartment on weekends, bringing takeout, playing dinosaurs with Wyatt, helping Russell fold laundry. She was terrible at it. She folded shirts wrong and mixed colors with whites. Russell teased her. She threw a sock at him. Slowly, the distance between them closed, not all at once, but in increments. A shared joke, a knowing look. The way Vivian started leaving her expensive jewelry at home when she visited, showing up in jeans and hoodies. The way Russell stopped flinching when she reached for her wallet, learning to let her help without feeling like he was taking charity. One evening, Wyatt fell asleep during a movie, some animated thing about talking fish. Russell carried him to bed. When he came back out, Vivian was standing by the window, looking at the city lights. "Can I ask you something?" she said without turning around. "Sure." "Why didn't you hate me? When I showed up here, offering money, acting like I could just buy my way back into your life. You should have hated me." Russell walked over, stood beside her. "I did. For about 5 minutes. Vivian glanced at him, surprised. Then I realized you weren't offering money because you thought I was worthless. You were offering it because you were terrified of being seen, of being known, of someone remembering who you used to be. He touched the bracelet on his wrist. I know what it's like to be scared, Viv. I've been scared every day since Wyatt was born. Scared I'd fail him. Scared I wasn't enough. Scared he'd end up like me. Alone. His voice dropped. You're not alone anymore. Neither am I. Vivian turned to face him fully. I don't deserve you. Good thing it's not about deserving. They stood there, inches apart, the weight of 31 years hanging between them. Then Vivian did something she hadn't done since she was 10 years old. She hugged him, just wrapped her arms around his waist and held on. Russell froze for a moment, then hugged her back. She smelled like expensive perfume and laundry detergent, and something underneath that was just... Viv. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on me. Russell rested his chin on top of her head. Never. 2 months passed. Wyatt got stronger. Russell kept working at the mansion, but now Vivian was there when he arrived. They'd have coffee in the kitchen, talk about nothing and everything. She asked his opinion on business decisions. He showed her how to fix a leaky faucet. It was strange and comfortable, and felt like something fragile they were both trying not to break. Then Lorraine Caldwell entered the picture. Lorraine was Vivian's oldest business partner. Old money, old grudges, old hunger for power. She'd been circling for years, waiting for any sign of weakness, and Vivian's recent distraction hadn't gone unnoticed. Lorraine hired a private investigator. It took him 3 weeks to piece it together. The orphanage records, the adoption papers, the sealed files that weren't quite sealed enough for someone with money and connections. Lorraine didn't confront Vivian. She did something worse. She organized a charity gala at Vivian's own mansion, invited every major investor and society figure in the city, and arranged for temporary staff to be hired through a specific agency, the same agency Russell worked for. Russell found out he'd been assigned to serve at the event 2 days before it happened. He called Vivian immediately. I'll say no. I'll get someone to cover my shift. Vivian was quiet for a long time. No, she finally said. If you refuse, Lorraine will know something's wrong. She'll dig deeper. Russell's stomach dropped. You think she knows? I think she suspects, and if she does, the gala is a trap. Vivian's voice was steady, but Russell heard the fear underneath. She's going to try to expose me in front of everyone. The night of the gala, Russell put on the server's uniform and drove to the mansion with his heart hammering. The place was transformed. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, a string quartet in the corner. Women in gowns worth more than his annual salary. Men in tuxedos, discussing mergers over champagne. Russell kept his head down, carried trays of hors d'oeuvres, blended into the background. Vivian was in the center of it all, wearing a silver dress that caught the light, her hair swept up, diamonds at her throat. She looked untouchable. She looked terrified. Their eyes met once across the crowded ballroom, just for a second. Then she looked away. Lorraine made her move at 9 o'clock. She tapped her champagne glass, called for everyone's attention. I'd like to make a toast, she said, her smile sharp. To Vivian Sterling, whose success story is truly remarkable, from orphan to billionaire. The room went silent. Vivian's face drained of color. Lorraine continued, her voice dripping false sweetness. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say orphan? I meant to say a woman of distinguished lineage. Although, she gestured to one of the servers, a PI in disguise, who handed her a folder. I have documents here that tell a different story. Birth certificates, adoption records, all showing that our dear Vivian was born Vivian Reeves, raised in Riverside Orphanage until age 10, when she was adopted by the Sterlings, and her past was conveniently erased. The room erupted in whispers. Vivian stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. Lorraine's smile widened. Now, I bring this up not to shame. She paused, mockingly sincere, but to question. If someone can lie about their entire identity, what else might they lie about? Business dealings? Financial records? She looked around the room. I move that we conduct a full audit of Sterling Enterprises. Unless, of course, Vivian would like to come clean about what other secrets she's been hiding. The whispers grew louder. Investors looked at each other, uncertainty spreading like wildfire. Vivian opened her mouth, closed it. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing, and everyone was watching. Russell made a decision. He stepped forward, out of the line of servers, into the center of the ballroom. Every eye turned to him. He walked straight to Vivian, stopping a few feet away. "Madam," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the silent room. "She grew up with me in the orphanage." The whispers exploded into chaos. Lorraine's smile faltered. Vivian looked at Russell like he'd just set himself on fire. Russell kept talking. "Her name was Vivian Reeves. We lived at Riverside Orphanage. She was 10 when she left. I was 11 when I left a year later. We lost touch." He pulled up his sleeve, showed the blue yarn bracelet. "But we made these, a promise to never forget each other." He turned to face the crowd. "You want to know who Vivian Sterling really is? She's someone who survived being abandoned, who built an empire from nothing, who's been so terrified of being seen as weak that she hid the strongest part of herself, where she came from." Russell looked at Vivian. "I'm a janitor, single dad. I work 3 jobs to keep my kid alive. When I found out Vivian was the little girl I knew, she didn't throw me out. She helped my son, not for publicity, not for tax write-offs, because underneath the suits and the money and the fear, she's still the girl who shared her food with kids who had nothing, who protected the small ones, who kept her promises." The ballroom was dead silent. Russell's hands were shaking, but he kept going. "So, yeah, she's an orphan. And you know what? That makes her more qualified to run a business than half the people in this room who inherited everything and earned nothing." He turned to Lorraine. "You wanted to destroy her. Congratulations. You exposed her past, but you also just showed everyone exactly who you are. Someone willing to weaponize a childhood trauma for a power play. How's that for a scandal?" Lorraine's face flushed red. "This man is nothing. A servant. Why should we believe? Because I'm still wearing the bracelet." Vivian's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stepped forward, and Russell saw her hand move to her wrist. She pulled off the diamond bracelets one by one, letting them drop to the floor with expensive clinks. Underneath was the faded blue yarn, identical to Russell's. The room gasped. Vivian held up her wrist. "Everything Russell said is true. My name was Vivian Reeves. I grew up in Riverside Orphanage. The Sterlings adopted me and erased my past because they were ashamed. I let them because I was terrified. I built Sterling Enterprises while pretending to be someone I wasn't." Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "I've spent 31 years hiding. 31 years thinking that if anyone knew the truth, I'd lose everything." She looked around the ballroom at the shocked faces. "Well, now you know. I'm an orphan. I started with nothing, and I built this empire anyway." She turned to Lorraine. "You wanted to audit me? Do it. You'll find every record clean, every deal legitimate, every contract honored. Because I didn't need a trust fund or family connections to succeed. I needed guts." Vivian's eyes blazed. "So yes, Lorraine, I'm an orphan, and I'm not ashamed anymore." The silence stretched. Then someone started clapping. It was one of the younger investors, a woman who'd built her tech startup from scratch. Another person joined. Then another. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. Not everyone. Some walked out, faces disapproving. But enough stayed. Enough clapped. Enough looked at Vivian with something like respect. Lorraine's face twisted. "This isn't over." She grabbed her purse and stormed out. The remaining guests slowly returned to their conversations. The energy shifted, but not broken. Vivian stood in the center of it all, still holding up her wrist with the bracelet, looking dazed. Russell walked over. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Vivian let out a shaky laugh. "I just destroyed my reputation in front of 100 people." "You told the truth." "Same thing." Russell smiled. "Not even close." Wyatt's voice suddenly rang out from the doorway. "Dad." Russell spun around. His son stood there in pajamas, Mrs. Chen trailing behind him apologetically. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Chen said. "He heard you weren't coming home and insisted." Wyatt ran across the ballroom, completely unconcerned with the fancy people watching, and crashed into Russell's legs. "Are you okay?" "Mrs. Chen said you were at a party with the pretty lady, and I wanted to make sure you weren't sad." Russell scooped him up. "I'm okay, buddy. What are you doing here?" Wyatt looked around with wide eyes. "Whoa, this place is fancy." Then he spotted Vivian. His face lit up. "Hi, Aunt Viv." The title made several guests turn to stare. Vivian's eyes welled up. "Hi, Wyatt." The little boy wriggled out of Russell's arms and ran to Vivian, hugging her waist. "Dad said you were sad sometimes. Are you sad now?" Vivian knelt down to his level, not caring that her expensive dress was touching the floor. "I was. But I'm not anymore." Wyatt smiled. "Good. Sad is yucky." He pulled a crumpled drawing from his pajama pocket. "I made you this. It's us. See? That's you. That's Dad. That's me. We're a family." The drawing showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a tree. Vivian took it with trembling fingers, stared at it like it was the most precious thing she'd ever held. "Thank you," she whispered. "Can I keep this?" Wyatt nodded enthusiastically. "Forever and ever." Vivian pulled him into a hug, and Russell saw tears streaming down her face. The guests who remained were watching now, but not with judgment, with something softer. Human. One woman wiped her own eyes. A man smiled. Even the string quartet, who'd been standing awkwardly with their instruments, started playing something gentle and sweet. Russell walked over, put his hand on Vivian's shoulder. She looked up at him, her mascara running, her hair falling out of its perfect updo, her armor completely stripped away. She looked like Viv, just Viv. "I think the gala's over," Russell said gently. Vivian laughed through tears. "I think you're right." She stood, took Wyatt's hand, and walked out of her own ballroom with her head high. Russell followed. They left behind the mansion, the investors, the whispers. Mrs. Chen took Wyatt home. Russell drove Vivian to his apartment. She sat on his couch in her silver gown, looking completely out of place, and somehow more at home than she'd ever looked anywhere. "I'm going to lose the company," she said. Russell handed her a cup of tea. "Maybe. The board will vote me out." "Probably. I'll be investigated, audited, dragged through every tabloid." "Likely." Vivian looked at him. "Then why do I feel lighter?" Russell sat beside her. "Because you're not carrying 31 years of lies anymore." Vivian sipped her tea, winced. "This is terrible. It's from a gas station. Why do you even have this?" "Because it was 99 cents, and I needed tea." Vivian laughed, really laughed, the kind that shakes your whole body. Russell laughed too. They sat there, drinking terrible tea in a tiny apartment, and for the first time in decades, Vivian felt like she could breathe. The fallout was brutal. The board voted Vivian out as CEO within a week. Investors pulled funding. Business partners severed ties. The mansion went up for sale to cover legal fees. Tabloids ran headlines: "Billionaire's Big Lie" and "Orphan to Oligarch, the Vivian Sterling Scandal." Vivian expected the anger, the betrayal, the vitriol. What she didn't expect was the other side. Emails from people who'd grown up in foster care, thanking her for speaking up. Letters from small business owners who'd built their companies from nothing, saying they'd always suspected she was one of them. Job offers from companies that valued grit over pedigree, and a message from a foundation for orphaned children asking if she'd consider joining their board. Vivian moved into a modest apartment, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen the size of her old closet. She took a position as a business consultant, making a fraction of her old salary, but enough to live on. She started volunteering at youth centers, and every Sunday, she had dinner with Russell and Wyatt. Sometimes they cooked, sometimes they ordered pizza. It didn't matter. One Sunday, 3 months after the gala, Wyatt asked Vivian if she'd come to his school for Grandparents' Day, since he didn't have grandparents. Vivian said yes. Russell watched her help Wyatt with his art project, a painted handprint tree, and saw her smile, real and unguarded. That evening, after Wyatt went to bed, Vivian stayed to help with dishes. "I've been thinking," she said, scrubbing a plate. "About what?" "About Rose. About how I spent 19 years being angry at the world, at myself." She rinsed the plate, set it in the rack. "I think she'd like Wyatt." Russell dried a cup, set it aside. "I think so too." Vivian turned to face him. "I know I can't replace his mom. I'd never try. But could I be something? Aunt, friend? I don't know. Just something." Russell looked at this woman who'd lost everything and somehow found herself. "Viv, you already are something. You've been something since the day you sat in that hospital and held my hand. Your family." Vivian's eyes filled. "Family." "Yeah." Russell pulled her into a hug. She pressed her face against his shoulder and cried quietly. Not sad tears. Something else. Relief, maybe. Or coming home. 6 months after the gala, Vivian got a call from her former company. The new CEO, the woman who'd clapped first at the ballroom, wanted a meeting. Vivian went, expecting a lawsuit. Instead, she got an offer. "The company's struggling," the CEO said. "Turns out your partnerships weren't built on your fake pedigree. They were built on your brain. We want you back, not as CEO, as Chief Innovation Officer. You develop, we manage. 50-50 split." Vivian considered it. "I have conditions. I work 4 days a week. Sundays are non-negotiable. And I want to start a scholarship fund for kids from the foster system." The CEO smiled. Done. Vivian took the job. A year after the gala, Riverside Orphanage, long since closed, was bought by a non-profit. They were turning it into a community center for at-risk youth. Vivian and Russell attended the opening ceremony. Wyatt ran around the old playground, now refurbished and safe. Vivian walked to the oak tree where she and Russell had made their promise. Someone had installed a bench beneath it. A plaque read, "For the children who grew here, you are not forgotten." Russell found her there. "You okay?" Vivian touched the bracelet on her wrist, faded, frayed, held together with careful stitches. "I spent so long trying to erase this place from my memory. Turns out, it was the only part of me worth keeping." Russell sat on the bench, and Vivian sat beside him. They watched Wyatt play, his laughter carrying across the grounds. "He wants to learn to knit," Russell said. "Says he wants to make bracelets for his friends." Vivian smiled. "I could teach him." "Yeah?" "Yeah. I might be a little rusty, but I remember the pattern." Russell looked at her. The woman who'd built an empire, lost it, and rebuilt herself. The girl who'd shared her bread. The friend who'd never really left. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming back, even if it took 31 years. Vivian leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for keeping the bracelet, for remembering me when I forgot myself." They sat under the oak tree as the sun set. Two kids who'd survived, two adults who'd found each other again, watching a little boy who would never have to choose between where he came from and who he wanted to be. Wyatt ran over, breathless and grinning. "Aunt Viv, Dad, they have dinosaur books inside. Can we stay and read?" Vivian stood, held out her hand. "Lead the way." Wyatt grabbed her hand and Russell's, pulling them toward the building. As they walked across the grounds of the place that had once felt like a prison and now felt like a beginning, Vivian looked down at the two hands holding hers, one small and sticky with playground dirt, one calloused and strong, and thought about promises. The ones we make when we're young, the ones we keep, the ones we break, and the ones we find our way back to, no matter how long it takes. Inside the community center, children laughed and played. The walls were painted bright colors, decorated with murals and dreams. This place would be different, because of people like Vivian and Russell, who knew what it meant to be forgotten and refused to let it happen to anyone else. Wyatt settled in the reading corner with a book about triceratops. Russell sat beside him. Vivian sat on his other side. The three of them, right there, a family that didn't follow any traditional definition, but worked anyway. Vivian thought about the little girl in the portrait hanging in her old mansion, now packed away in storage. That girl had made a promise under an oak tree. She'd broken it for 31 years. But in the end, she'd come back. And that, Vivian realized, was what mattered. Not that she'd failed, but that she'd found her way home. Russell caught her eye over Wyatt's head, smiled. Vivian smiled back. Outside, the sun set over Riverside, painting the sky gold and pink. The oak tree stood strong, its branches reaching up like arms, ready to hold anyone who needed shelter. Two blue bracelets, faded and frayed, but still intact, rested on two wrists side by side. 31 years apart, a lifetime of loss and fear. But in the end, a promise kept, and that was everything.